You're listening to Being Built. I'm Aaron Davis, the founder of Recless Tech. We're an executive search and tech staffing firm. I'm here with Nate Denlinger, and you're the VP of Software Development or Software Engineering.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. And we were talking about some other connections that we share. You know, a couple of people that I know, and I didn't realize how familiar we were, but we got friends in common. That's cool.
Yeah, and actually, I think I even interviewed while you were COO
That's
at
right.
Smart Data.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. We had a whole nother connection there.
A couple of years. So
yeah, I think that's how I was most familiar with your name and your background and stuff. That's cool. So now you're running software development for RoveIQ, which is, that product was really interesting. And I first heard about it when you did another podcast, an interview with Alec.
Correct.
Is that right?
At Data Yard.
We'll do a little shout out to Alec at Data Yard. But they did a cool interview, and when you guys had that talk, obviously you guys went deep into the cloud stuff.
Right.
I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to pretend to try to copy that conversation. But I am curious about the product and about the business that you're in, kind of your team and what you guys are building there. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we are now known as RoveIQ. We originally started off as a company called SmartLink. We rebranded about a year ago. But the company was kind of built on the idea of building smart interactive kiosks for, malls and municipalities. And basically, I mean, you just think of a massive, almost iPad type application that does everything from, selfies to wayfinding inside for malls and areas like that. And these are big, normally two-sided, 55 up to 75-inch screen TVs that are touch screen.
Okay.
There's all different things, but the main thing is basically our idea is to replace, the static directories that you would see at a mall. So instead of walking up and looking for, if you're trying to find Macy's and you have to look on the directory and it says, okay, it's number 23, and then you look and then you try, and then you got to try to figure out where you are and then, okay, what's the best route? Whereas with our software, it's you walk up and you can do a search for Macy's and it shows you where it is. And then it even gives you an actual routing line to actually walk there and shows you how to get there. If it's on a different floor, it'll take you to the elevator first or the escalator and all that type of stuff.
So it's a maps system inside a huge building or facility.
Correct. And so we originally targeted more municipalities. We thought that was going to be a big thing, we actually originally worked with like City of Cincinnati, and we almost got them put around like the streetcar. But it became pretty apparent there's a lot of other markets there or competitors there. And also there is a lot of other products that compete with that. Okay. So, for example, if you go downtown Cincinnati and you park at a parking garage and then you want to go to the Red Stadium, what do? You pull out your phone and you open up Google Maps and it'll take you there.
Sure.
However, if you go to a mall and you're on the first floor and you just walked in and you want to go to Build-A-Bear with your kid on the third floor, you can't pull out your phone and it's not going to give you directions to go to the escalator up here, go down this hall, go up the next escalator, and then Build-A-Bear's there. So we've kind of transitioned from focusing more on municipalities to, what we would consider mixed use properties that have normally a retail plus offices sometimes and, apartments and stuff like that.
And so we were talking about the green over here in our neighborhood.
Yeah. So there's some places we work with Liberty Center down in Westchester, and we work, our very first customer was Newport on the Levee.
Okay. That seems like a fitting customer.
Yeah. So the company started down in the northern Kentucky area. The owner was out of Newport area. So they were our very first customer that we worked with.
I'm thinking about how many customers are out there, right? Like a couple of malls are just not popular to go to anymore. But then you have a lot of these like budding places where they have the apartments in them and the restaurants in them and all that kind of stuff mixed in together. That's the new version of the mall, I guess. It's like a thing to do, not just a bunch of shops.
Well, I think one of the driving factors is people like these ideas of what they call micro communities now, where you kind of have like a built-in customer base. So if people live there and work there or work there, they're much more likely to go to a restaurant there or buy clothing from there. So you kind of have like a built-in customer base. So like you said, like malls are kind of dying. And so we don't see a whole lot of malls where it's just purely a mall. And then also a lot of them are trying to be more indoor outdoor. And one of the things like we specialize in is building our kiosks are all weatherproof completely. So they can go indoor or outdoor. You don't have to worry about there being a hurricane or there being a snowstorm or anything like that. They can, live through all that.
So what's the state of the business? Like how mature is it and how long's it been around? And
so the company's been around for about 5-6 years now. When the company was first started, it was kind of an interesting shift. So originally the company focused more on the actual hardware side of the kiosk, and we were actually building our own kiosk down in a plant down near in Evendale near GE.
Okay.
And we spent a lot of time and effort, and we pretty quickly realized that while we had software engineers and we had those type of people, we did not have mechanical and electrical engineers.
Yeah.
And if you're going to build a smart kiosk that has to be able to survive hurricanes and all this, and heat's obviously one of the biggest factors when it comes to electronics.
Oh, interesting.
We're not well suited.
Yeah, you weren't the experts of the experts to be.
And then originally, like I said, the company actually was using third-party software to put on their hardware, and pretty quickly they started to realize, hey, we don't want to be in the hardware industry. We want to be in the software industry.
Okay.
Hardware isn't great because normally it's a one-time sale, and maybe a maintenance contract, but there's no recurring income, so it's hard to build that business. Whereas with software, we do ours basically kind of a software as a service type platform where, there's a monthly fee and it's based off of the number of screens and all that. So there's that monthly recurring income that builds up as you build your business.
Okay.
So the company kind of in those first 2 years transitioned from a hardware company to a software company. And so my buddy who got hired on as CTO, when they started to make that transition and realized they wanted to make that transition, I have a background in building software, and I've always kind of specialized in greenfield, building new products. And so he asked me if I wanted to come on and lead that effort. So
nice. And so you've been there now how long?
Just over 5 years.
Okay, so you've been with them for a little bit.
Yeah, so we've gone through multiple versions of our product. We've added more and more features as we've gone, and we've built in tons of more features that make it easier to use. And so one of the things that our software does that a lot of the other competitors doesn't is a lot of the other ones are almost like, think of like a Figma or something like that, where you basically have to like design what goes on the kiosk and then you can push it out. Whereas ours, we wanted to build it more like a WordPress, where it's almost like a CMS. And we have built-in templates and stuff that they can pick from and they can customize. But they don't have to worry about the design. They don't have to be the subject matter experts on how should we develop a kiosk software.
Storefront's a storefront.
Exactly.
Just kind of create templates for that.
So basically our web portal is a CMS type style application where they can get in, they can put all their location data in there, they can configure all their kiosks, and then literally the kiosks check in once every minute. And they pull down any new settings that they need. So if they go in and they need to change the phone number on a store, they can update that and it gets pushed out to all the kiosks.
Moves out, moves in, that kind of thing.
It's almost instantaneous. It's within a minute. So
that's pretty
so yeah, we wanted to focus more on ease of use versus allowing people to have like all this freedom. But a lot of times companies don't know. Like they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
So if you just give software to somebody and say, hey, you can build your own interface for a kiosk, they have no idea what to build.
Well, the absolute most freedom you can give a customer is to do nothing for them. Right. So you're right. I mean, the freedom is mixed with the burden to figure it out.
And there are software out there that do that, but that's not the market we're trying to hit. I mean, if you had already had a team of developers and you already had a team of designers and all that, then yeah, those work great. But most of our customers are mixed use companies where they might have a marketing department. They might have a graphic designer on staff, but they definitely normally don't have developers on staff and anything like that. So if you just give them a blank slate and say, here, go build whatever you want, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, they're real estate managers.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's their business, is they're managing real estate and such. So that's cool. So how far is your customer base at this point? All U.S. based? Is it all regional or what?
So we've basically so far stayed inside the United States. We have everywhere from California to Florida to New York, We're basically everywhere. We tend to be more in the warmer climates, just simply because there's a higher number of like the indoor outdoor facilities.
Okay. Just because that kind of target spot that likes your product is more
so
prevalent.
If you're talking like pricing wise, like a kiosk that you're going to put in an indoor area is like a quarter of the price of one that's indoor.
Just because it's temperature controlled?
Temperature controlled, and it doesn't have to be NEMA. It doesn't have to be able to survive a hurricane. It doesn't have to be able to survive rain. There's no water. I mean, water and heat are your two biggest issues when you're talking about a big electronic device like that.
Selling a product on a little beach shopping center in Hollywood, Florida is way better than an indoor mall in Dayton.
So
Ohio,
we have a bunch of customers down in Florida and the Miami area, out in California, and we're kind of spreading out. We're trying to hit some other markets, like healthcare facilities and universities. You go walk onto a big university, Ohio State or something. I mean, that's a huge place. If you're there and you just want to try to figure a way like how to get to a building, like good luck.
True.
So we've been reaching out to a lot of universities and trying to get in with those. We've also started hitting more and more arenas, sports arenas.
Okay.
So we have we're working, I'm not sure who I'm allowed to talk about, but we do have some arenas like up in New York City, and we have one out in California, baseball stadiums and stuff like that. And so, it's been cool to get to work with those companies too.
So what in the baseball stadium and the football stadium, whatever, you would see where the vendors are, where the box seats are, just to kind of you'd be able to kind of navigate what resources are available inside the stadium.
Yeah. So imagine like you walk into a baseball stadium, for example, the Reds Stadium, and you want to first of all find your seat. Okay. Well, sometimes that's not easy. So
it's its own challenge.
You can put in you can look up the section and it'll tell you exactly, go to this escalator, go up, this many spots, and then, you'll go this way, and it'll take you right to your section.
Okay.
Or let's say you want to, you're at the Red Stadium and you want to find a specific restaurant, a specific vendor. Once again, that can be hard to do, because you're walking all the way around. You don't know which floor it's on. So you can pick out which restaurant you're trying to find, and it'll take you right there. But there's also some really weird caveats when you get into stadiums. Like, for example, one of the stadiums we're working with, the escalators go up before the game, and then at the end of the game, they go down. And so
you got some really,
exactly. You have
after
some
8 p.m., you have to have the whole game schedule and everything, huh?
So that's been stuff that, like, as we've moved into that market, it was stuff we never even had to think about when we were doing mixed use.
Yeah, they changed the direction.
And also, like with a stadium, like one of the stadiums, most of their vendors are mobile. So whereas when you're doing a mall, every building, like it's brick and mortar, they don't move. But they're like, oh, well, we need to be able to have the restaurant here. And then next week, we were going to move it over here.
I see.
And so how are you going to route that? How are they going to update that? There's a lot that goes into that. So there's some weird caveats that go with stadiums.
Sounds like a fun challenge, though.
Yep. Yeah, it is.
Stadiums sound fun, but a lot of extra variables there.
We obviously have our kiosk, but then we also have like a mobile side to our product also, where let's say you're at the mall and you get instructions and it shows you how to walk to something that's pretty far away.
Okay.
Well, as soon as you walk away from that kiosk, you have to then memorize it. But we have an option where you can scan a QR code and it opens it up and it actually uses your phone to navigate you there. We do it all browser based. One of the things originally people were asking for was mobile apps. Okay. And I was a big proponent of avoiding mobile apps at all costs, because
nobody wants to download an app at the mall. Yeah.
You don't want to go to a new mall and have to download an app just for that mall, and then go to another mall. Or whatever. Exactly. Yeah. And same with like a stadium or anything else. So we didn't want to. So all of our stuff is browser based, and you don't have to download anything. But basically, it'll actually navigate you to the correct store. But one caveat with that, the weird part is when you're doing obviously geolocation, when you're talking about a kiosk, you have fixed positions. Okay. You're starting from a fixed lat and longitude exact. And so it can figure out the route to get you there. But then when you start talking about a moving target, a person walking with a phone, you obviously have to have location. So normally in an outdoor facility, GPS works great, but then there's some weird caveats.
Malls and hospitals, not so great.
Exactly. You lose all GPS. So So there's some things that we have to do, and new technology we've been trying to work with, especially as we've moved into the healthcare industry and in some other places where GPS just isn't an option.
Right.
And so there is options like, Bluetooth beaconing and Wi-Fi beaconing and stuff like that.
Oh, that's interesting. So how far along is your mobile product? Is that in the market now?
Yeah. So we obviously, one of the big motivators to get that done and fully ready and working was COVID. So obviously during COVID, people didn't want to walk up and touch a screen, first of all, because they had no idea when it was last cleaned. And so there was a lot more push for us to have our mobile product available. So they could, instead of making the screen interactive, they could just put a QR code up on the screen all the time. People could scan it, and then they could have the exact same experience basically that they had on the kiosk on their phone.
Okay.
So we really pushed hard and got that out for our normal kiosk stuff during COVID.
Which sounds great until that Cinnabon pulls somebody off their route.
Yeah.
And then you need that geolocation, right?
Yeah. But we've been another vertical we've been kind of pushing into more and more is healthcare.
Okay.
And once again, there's some obstacles there when we originally took the idea of, hey, let's put these kiosks at a hospital. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of issues there with PII and HIPAA and compliance. And, you don't want to be able to just walk in a hospital, put a last name in and find the room that's like,
Sure.
Oh yeah, there is this patient here.
Okay.
And it's going to take you there. But they still needed that navigation piece because a lot of hospitals are pretty complex and hard to navigate for people.
Yep.
I mean, it's very rare that you can walk in a hospital without having to stop and ask somebody, how do I get somewhere?
Sure.
So what we've done is we've worked on a product that's mobile only. It's not dependent on the kiosk, specifically for healthcare. And it encompasses the entire trip. So what happens is the hospital actually sends out a link with an appointment reminder. They can pull it up. And once again, it's fully browser based. We don't have to install apps and we don't have to do anything with that. It not only navigates them there via car, just like a Google map experience where it gives them turn by turn directions. But then once they get in a geofenced area of the hospital, it shows them where to park. It then gives them walking directions into the hospital to the right lobby. And then once they're inside and we lose GPS, one of the things we've been doing for healthcare is we actually do similar to Google Street View, where once you get in, you get a 3D picture sphere.
Okay.
And it kind of shows you, and you can push forward and you can move along through the steps, and it'll take you to the right elevator. It'll take you to the right floor. It'll take you to the right lobby and check in here, then go down this hall and check in here. There might be 2 or 3 steps depending on where you're going.
That's pretty swift.
So that's been the big product we've been working on and doing a pilot for about the last year with a Cincinnati hospital.
Nice. Okay. So you've got some buy-in and some good customer feedback.
Yeah, and so it's been working really well for the last year, and so now we're actually making that an actual full-blown product. Mm-hmm. Whereas the original was a pilot, so it was a lot of stuff was built specifically for them, and it was built for development speed and stuff like that. Now we're turning it into more of a software as a service where somebody can sign up and be up and running pretty quickly. So.
You talked about kind of speed of development and that kind of thing. So tell me a little bit about your team.
Yeah, so our team's pretty small. The company's pretty small and agile. Our CTO, he kind of obviously has a lot of responsibilities outside of development, but he can also code. So I would say he's probably about 50% code and 50% project management and customer, relations and stuff like that. I'm the VP, and then we have 2 other developers underneath me.
Okay.
And one of them we've had for about a year. The other one we've had for about 2 or 3 years.
Nice.
We're small and agile, and there's a lot that goes in with that because especially with all these different verticals and trying to build different products, you're trying to get every salesperson wants to pull you in a different direction, obviously. Every salesperson thinks what they're selling is the most important.
I see.
So there's a lot that goes into prioritization and, figuring out, what is the best thing to work on at the current phase, what's going to help the company both in the short term and the long term. And just helping everybody in the company understand the cost benefit of analysis of everything, and that there's always a cost. If we stop working on something else, to help sign one single customer, that might not be the best idea because
right. Are those solutions you can sell again?
Exactly. Right. And so there's a lot that goes into that. That's in every company I've ever worked for. That's obviously one of the hardest parts in tech. Every person I've ever talked to, the hardest part is prioritization and figuring out what everybody's supposed to be working on and getting buy-in from everybody and making sure that everybody's on the same page. Because when you start trying to multitask, especially as a small company, it very rarely works well.
Sure.
One of the things we have to remind non-developers of often is there's a famous thing that I've heard a long time ago is that if you need something done, if you need a baby born in a month, you can't hire 9 women and
right.
get each of them, have 1 month worth of work.
That's right.
It doesn't work that way. Scaling horizontally doesn't always end up with a quicker outcome.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we kind of always have to push. And we actually have like a dev priorities meeting where everybody who has things that needs done has to come to the meeting. And then obviously everybody talks about it and figures out what's, the best thing that we should be working on at any given point.
So you answered a question that was on my mind, which is how you go about prioritization. When you've got multiple customers and you mentioned the salespeople delivering those messages, which is good that they're hearing that customers say what they want and hearing the customers say what they don't like or what they would like and that kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. You need that input. How do you adjust the volume appropriately on those voices and know, like one thing is knowing you can reuse that feature, but how do you know how do you learn that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you ultimately need one person who's going to be responsible or be the final say, because if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, they're all never going to back down. Everybody thinks their priority is the highest priority. So ultimately it comes down to you need one person that's ultimately going to be responsible for saying, this is the route we're taking. I've heard everybody. I've heard the benefits. I've heard the costs. I've heard how much money this will bring us immediately or down the road, and this is where we're going. And because I've heard of other companies that, they have 20 people show up to their priorities meeting, but then there's no person at the end to say, okay, I've heard all the priorities. This is what we're working on. And so the developers are stuck in this weird spot of,
they're trying to pick who's most authority.
Exactly. Well, like who do I want to please and who do I want to, burn? And you get this weird, there's also this weird thing where people try to bypass the system.
Sure.
And so you have...
I've done that. I hate to admit that. I'm sorry, guys. I've done that.
And that's one thing
I'm thinking of like 3 people right now that I've done that too. Oh, man, my bad. Hey, could you just work on this and this?
Exactly. And that's one thing I always have to train new developers on is... I guarantee within the first few weeks of you working as a new developer at a place, somebody's going to reach out to you directly and they're going to try to bypass systems.
They're trying to pet project you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, could you just help me out with this? It'll probably only take you a few hours, and it's like, we know we have to prioritize everything. If I'm not working on what I was working on, like if I work on your stuff, something else is suffering.
That's right.
And it shouldn't be especially a junior developer's job to ever try to figure out what the priority of a company, multi-million-dollar company is. Like that, right. A, that's not their specialty, and B, they don't have a clue.
Well, you have all these more senior people, parachuting into the junior guy's desk, telling them code this, code that. I've seen that happen. I haven't done that, but I've seen that happen. And it is really disruptive.
It is.
Meanwhile, all of your critical paths are interrupted because your forecasts were wrong and your story points estimates or whatever you're using to allocate attention or whatever is all off.
Right. And it's a tough spot to put a junior developer in, especially because
it's a no-win.
Well, yeah, they don't know who they're allowed to say no to yet. They don't, they're trying to make a good impression. They're trying to, I can be that person that, that does this for them. And I'm going to get on their good side and stuff like that. So it's a tough spot to put people new.
Probably not so bad in a smaller team, a micro team where you count but
still happens.
It still happens. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Every time we hire somebody new.
And all that,
Oh yeah. We let them know, hey, you're going to hear from, somebody else in the company, whether it's a salesperson or a customer support person or somebody else. you're going to get contacted directly.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily blame those people because they're obviously trying to get their job done too.
Of course.
But it's good to have those systems in place just to kind of protect them and let them know, hey, you don't have to do that. So
that's a really good point. I worked in ran the services shop you mentioned, and we always had to challenge with prioritization of stuff and figuring out what was in scope versus out of scope. A customer would say, oh, can we just add this, this, and this? Like, okay, that's, of course we can, but that's outside of the agreement we made or whatever. Right. So we'll have to, we weren't doing fixed scope stuff, but it was still like you run into all these little gray areas around stuff. And what it came down to is just the ability to say, we have a process, for grooming stories or for prioritizing tasks or whatever you call it, whatever framework you use or whatever to make decisions and prioritize and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Making sure that everybody knows that it exists and it exists for a reason. And there's an authority structure in place there that's not clear. And this kind of like rogue IT, back office or back alley conversation we're having. So yeah. I think authorizing junior people with that knowledge early on is helpful. Knowing that if it doesn't come through this process, if it's not groomed this way, if it's not authorized by this project team or whatever, then this is not sanctioned work. This is your free time.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think another part of it is the idea of,
I was talking about having junior devs know that the certain process of authority is your authority, and anything they ask you to do other than that, they're asking you to do it on your free time.
Right. Yeah.
Giving them an understanding of what the authority structure is and pointing to that process as a clarity about that everybody from the top. I think you really do need to hear that from the top though.
Yeah, you do. And you need to make sure they understand, like, you're not going to get in trouble for telling somebody, no, I'm not going to work on this, or tell them, hey, you need to follow the process.
Right. Or, hey, you're asking me to spend my weekend doing that.
Right. Yeah.
Is that what you're asking me? Because I've committed to doing this 40 hours a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you asking me to spend my weekend doing that?
Yeah. Or who are you saying their job or their priorities is less important?
Right.
Like, are you going to go tell that person that their priority is less important?
I've committed to these things. Which one should I postpone?
Yeah, exactly. So it is tough. But I mean, that's, like I said, it doesn't matter whether you're at a company of 10 people or 10,000 people. Yeah. That happens.
Sure does.
Every developer I've ever talked to, that's an issue they just have to deal with. And the quicker you can kind of figure that out, the better. The company kind of the development process will run smoother when you're not pulled in 20 different directions and having to manage these different relationships with all these different people.
I wonder if we'd learned some of that. I've worked in really big organizations and micro organizations, right? So obviously there are more places to hide, and in a big organization, sometimes you get stuck doing some low impact stuff. It's kind of filler work or whatever. And there's just a lot less like clarity about exactly what, the top person is thinking and prioritizing and for what purpose. That it gets harder the bigger an organization gets. So I think there are times when like smart, capable people get kind of stuck in this, like, I'm working on something that's kind of boring, low impact. It doesn't really take that much of my time. I do have downtime. And so they become more receptive to this side project that's high impact for somebody. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that can be a bad training ground sometimes. If
and one of the other things that kind of also gets overlooked, especially for people who are newer to the company, whether they're senior or junior, is like they don't necessarily know all the dependencies. So if they were to make a small change, what they think is a small change, they don't know how that affects every other person. They don't necessarily know all the business decisions that were made over the last 5 years that made it the way it is.
Yeah.
Where they might think, oh, well, that was just an oversight. They obviously meant to do it this way. No, that was done for a very specific purpose.
Yeah.
And we had made this decision 3 years ago. We actually used to have it that way, and we took that out, or we removed that, or we changed that for a specific reason. So one other thing that we try to also train people is like, you don't ever really need to say, no, that's not an option. It's, okay, like when you get to the prioritizations phase, it's never no, we're never going to do this, or we can't do this. It's okay, here's how long it'll take. Here's the dependencies, and here's, like all the give the business leaders the tools to make the decision. And so if you say, oh, well, this will take 2 weeks, they'd be like, okay, that's worth it. Like, let's spend 2 weeks on this. Whereas you say this is going to take 8 months. You don't have to sit there and try to sell them on the idea that this is a bad idea. You can help them realize, oh, okay, because they don't necessarily understand all the technical requirements. You could list off, well, if we're going to do this, we need to, list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. They might not understand. That might be to them. That might be 2 weeks. That might be 2 months. That might be 2 years. So it's better to help them understand like what the non-technical side, like, okay, this is going to take our team eight months to work on. And that means we're not going to be doing anything else for 8 months. And if we have to stop and work on something else, obviously that extends that. So instead of giving, like, I think that's one area where I think some technology people struggle is they're sitting there trying to explain the technical side to non-technical people when instead they should be explaining, this is going to take us 3 months. And this is going to cost us this amount of money. And this is going to, we're going to have to hire 2 new developers in order to do this. Or this is going to, we might have a lot, every time now we want to make a change on something on this feature, it's going to take us twice as long because now we added this feature just for this one customer. So those are the things I think are way more important to let the business leaders know versus trying to get them to understand the technical side of things.
Yeah, it drove my thought a lot to the idea that we have about estimating. And you laugh immediately because as well as I do that it's kind of a fool's errand sometimes. Yeah. We're shooting in the dark a little bit, and not a little bit. We're shooting in the dark a lot.
Always.
But nevertheless, we do know the difference between something that takes 2 weeks and something that takes 2 years. Do we know the difference between something that takes 2 days and something that takes 2 months? Probably, right? And so it's really about degrees of precision is what it is.
Well, so what we do is we try to lower the margin of error. So we don't necessarily do like pure agile where we have, exact, sometimes we depends on the mode of the company. Sometimes we're in more of a, we're building a bunch of stuff as quick as we can versus sometimes it's, we're kind of more in a stable, building process. Just depends on what customers are signing on, what new products we're trying to add, what new features.
Okay.
But one of the things that we as a development team do that our CTO has kind of pushed is when we do estimation, anything that gets broken down and it's more than 13 hours or 13 points has to be broken down into smaller tickets. Because if you're estimating something at 2 months and your margin of error is 100%,
right,
then you're off by 2 months.
Right.
Whereas if you have a ticket that's 2 hours and your margin of error is 100%, you're off by 2 hours. I'd much rather be off by 2 hours than 2 months.
Sure.
So we try to minimize that margin of error based off just purely the size of the thing we're estimating. So we don't ever just like get a big project and say, hey, this is roughly going to take 6 months. We'll take the time to break that entire task down into things smaller than 20 hours. And, we use a normal, planning poker style, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 5 hours. It uses the Fibonacci sequence. Yeah. And so, you can go all the way up to 13. And if we all say, hey, it's going to take over 13, okay, we got to break that ticket up into multiple tickets. And that seems to help a lot. Simply because you're not trying, when you're thinking about a large project, there's just so many things you have to try to keep in your mind. But if you're thinking about a task that's going to take you 2 days or less, it's a lot easier to kind of think of all the things, the factors that might play into that.
How well do you think you account for the margin of error as you're communicating estimates?
So I think that's something also that goes down to training junior developers. Once again, junior developers are always, in my mind, trying to impress. So you'll throw out a ticket and they'll, oh, that's going to take me 2 hours. And all the senior people who have been doing this for a long time
are laughing on the inside. Like, cool, go for it.
Okay, we'll see you you have that ticket done by the end. We always joke around. Okay, we'll see you by the end of the day. Go ahead and turn that ticket in. And it's like, no, that's at least 10 hours. Like, right. We know we have the experience. So we kind of, that's our joke with, okay, we'll have that done by the end of the day. If you think
so
it's
you're not leaving
2
until
hours.
It's done?
Exactly.
So, I did say, you and I talked before we turned on the camera that we're both kind of home improvement DIYers, right? So I do the same thing when when I'm talking to my wife about how much work it's going to take to replace that countertop or something. Or I can put that floor in. Yeah, that'll just be a Saturday afternoon, no problem.
Yeah, that
3 Saturdays later, right? Because in your head you've gone through all the steps, and it was pretty simple to think through all the things that need to be done until you accidentally nick that plumbing line or whatever. And the same thing happens with code. You can't account for the things you just don't know in advance.
You don't know what you don't know. And until you start, digging into something, like you just don't know what's there.
It's 100 times more true with code than it is for putting a floor into a bathroom, because that there 3 floors have been put in just that specific bathroom, right? Let alone the hundreds or thousands or whatever of other bathrooms that have laid that kind of floor, right? There's all kinds of precedent and points of reference for a task that I have a hard time estimating, even though I've done it 100 times before. So you write code, you're almost certainly building something that hasn't been built exactly that way for exactly that purpose.
Well, it's one of those weird things that the longer you build a product, I think the worse your estimation gets, because when you're first starting, you have all the knowledge, like especially if it's a small team of developers, 2 developers, they basically have their hands on every piece of the code. And they know the entire dependency tree. They know all the things that if I change this, it affects this downstream. But if you've been working on a product for 4 or 5 years, even if you're a solo developer, I'm sorry, but you're not going to remember every single thing that touches. And then as you add more developers, you may never even seen that code because somebody else wrote it and somebody else did the code review. So you've literally never even seen it. So you're kind of walking into it blind. So the longer you go, I think the worse your estimation gets, because you don't have as much domain knowledge and you don't know that entire dependency tree of the code.
I heard somebody say the other day, all useful code, all code in production is read more than it's written. There's more time spent reading it than there's time spent writing it, right?
Yeah, there's another thing that when you do a code commit, whether you're using GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, any of those, it'll normally show you how many lines of code you're adding, but it also shows you how many lines of code you're removing. And one of the good signs of a really good developer is they normally remove more code than they add. They're making things more simple. It's not, I've worked with companies where they try to put KPIs on developers, and they're trying to figure out, well, how can you do a KPI on a developer? It's like, well, how about just lines of code? It's like, no, I mean, you're trying to get somebody to be more verbose. It would be like, that's a horrible precedent.
It's like measuring number of words used to determine how well somebody communicated.
Would you rather get emails that are 1 paragraph, or would you rather get emails that are two pages long?
I'm a big fan of the 2-word email.
Exactly. And code's the same way. You would much rather open up a piece of code that you can quickly scan and understand in 5 minutes versus it's going to take you 5 days just to try to even guess what's going on. So good code is always shorter and more succinct and just much more easy to read.
You don't want to look at the financial model I put together. My Excel cells are way too long. My if-then strains are...
Hey, you can write Python in Excel now. They just added that feature.
Yeah, maybe I'll get to that one day. So RoveIQ, you've been there for 5 years. You have a small team. What's next for RoveIQ? Like, you guys are working on this mobile thing, and then getting into the hospital space is another big thing.
The healthcare is I would say is our biggest push right now, as far as trying to reach like a new market vertical and kind of a new product. We actually kind of are marketing it even as a standalone product. So instead of our normal product is called RoveIQ. This is called Rove DR. So kind of has play on words as far as DR for doctor and for driving.
That's cute.
So we're kind of building that kind of as a standalone product. We're doing a couple other things as far as like even technology wise. We're building it on GCP, Google Cloud Provider, instead of AWS.
Oh, interesting.
Because Google Cloud Provider is a lot better, even though right now our product doesn't really touch any PII or HIPAA data at all. We can definitely foresee in the future possibly integrating with people's, Epic systems or My Charts and stuff like that, where you would definitely have to worry about HIPAA and all that stuff. And Google Cloud Provider definitely has a lot better protection for the company when it comes to HIPAA compliance and stuff like that.
Okay, interesting.
Versus like AWS. AWS has what's called AWS Gov Cloud, which they built specifically like for government contractors and stuff. But even then, like based off of all of our research, they're still not as good as Google when it comes to actually signing papers and saying, yes, we're HIPAA compliant, we're all this, so we've actually decided to kind of build that completely separate in a completely different environment.
So with regard to your Rove DR product, you said you're partnered with the hospital to kind of build a pilot out, and you're getting that kind of in the phase where you're making that product more of a broadly marketable product.
Right.
And so what's the next phase for you? Where are you going from there?
Yeah. So like I said, right now we're kind of in the transition period of taking it something that was basically, think of like when you were in the days of smart data, you're building a product for a single person. Everything's kind of hard coded. The destination point, for example, like, hey, you're getting a text. Well, every single person is going to the same hospital. Every single person is parking in the same parking lot. Everybody's going to the same lobby. Whereas now it's, and that was all configured by us, obviously, also, where now it's, hey, we're building a product. This hospital can buy it. They need to be able to have, just like we have for our RoveIQ product, they need to have a web portal where they can log in, they can add destination points, they can add the pictures for the photospheres, they can set up the geofences for the parking areas, they can set all the different same day surgery or radiology, like all these destination points that people are going to have to get to. And then also like building it in like technology for their tech teams, whether it's, automatically get the links to send out to people or analytics data if they want to get that. Sending in information like as far as how many messages they sent out so they can get information back as far as like how much user buy-in there is and how far people how much they use the product. So there's a lot of data there that kind of has to go back and forth.
Yeah. So your feature list is long. There's a lot of different things you guys could be focused on. And on.
So it's
really about product right now. Still,
right. So it's taking it from a one-off to hey, this is universal. Any healthcare facility can sign up with us tomorrow, and we could have a product rolled out for them in, a couple of days.
I'm assuming, most hospitals have more of a technology team than most, shopping malls or mixed use, real estate centers.
There's a ton of red tape, unfortunately. Yeah. That's one of the hard parts about that industry is everything goes through layers and layers of technology teams. Because there's just there's so much technology in hospitals. They have these huge enterprise platforms like Epic and My Chart and stuff that are massive, and they're so used to dealing with this high security data that when we say, no, we don't collect any information, all you have to do is get a URL and send it out with your email messages or your text messages.
Triggers fear.
They're like, well, wait, what are we missing? Why
is that so easy?
Why is it so easy? And it's like, because we don't ever ask for their username. We don't have passwords. We don't have anything. Like literally the only security we have is for the people who work at the hospital to log into our web platform to set it up. Yeah. Other than that, there is like zero data that we need. And like I said, that could change over time. We could see eventually, have hospitals say, hey, we want this automatically integrated with My Chart. They should be able to log in and get directions and all this stuff. That could happen down the future or in the future. But right now, it's super simple for us. And so it's just trying to get them to wrap their head. They're these technology teams that are used to doing weeks of research and investigation to see how secure this third-party app that they're going to use is, to be like, no, literally, we're just going to give you a link and you email it out or text
That's
it
right.
out. We don't even send it. You do.
And the user just opens it and it tells them where to go. It gives them directions.
Yep.
Yeah, every time I've had an appointment in a hospital, somebody's given me some attempt to get there. Some like, oh, turn left at the whatever.
Right.
It's always garbage because it's written in some text and it's buried in a bunch of other stuff that I'm half paying attention to. It's like, okay, so you need these forms.
It's never one step. It's never go to the elevator, go up to floor 3, and it'll be down on your right. It's normally, especially the bigger hospitals, it's go down this hall, go past the first set of elevators because they don't go to the floor you need to go to. Go to the second set of elevators, go up those, then go down past the cafeteria. Exactly. Go past the cafeteria, then go to another cell of elevators that go up 2 more floors, and then go down that hall. And so, it's...
Is this the west escalator? Where am I? Am I west?
Well, and also like with big hospitals, you also have normally different parking lots, know? And so even something as simple as we're trying to get everybody to park. If it's same day surgery, they should park here. Or if it's long term, they're going to be here for long term. They should be parking in this parking lot.
Yeah.
So something as simple as that, where it's, if you just pull up Google Maps and you put in the hospital name, it's just going to take you to the hospital. You don't have any idea where you should park. You don't have any idea, there's a lot of other factors that go into that. So just trying to make it kind of a one-stop shop. Literally, you get a text message you get from your house to the chair you're actually sitting in the waiting room in.
Yeah. I'm curious about RoveIQ as a broader organization. You talked a little bit about the technology team and the rest of RoveIQ, I guess, is focused on sales and marketing and
so we have
operations, right?
So we obviously have a CEO, and then we have we have probably 4 or 5 dedicated salespeople, outside sales. And one of them is the newest one is actually more towards the Rove DR side. So she specializes in the healthcare industry. So she has a lot of previous relationships with those.
Nice.
Then we have kind of a customer support / I would say like more of the hardware side. And that's led by a guy who has a lot of experience with actually like getting construction like units installed. Because you start putting these big kiosks outdoor, you have to worry about running electrical,
all your architectural implications
networking.
Come into play.
You have to worry about concrete pads. You have to worry about all this stuff. Construction companies, electrical companies. So he has experience with that. And then there's another guy who's underneath him who does the installing the software if they have a problem, being able to log in. And we have a kind of a customer success side. And they help out with designing like the 3D. So our wayfinding, indoor wayfinding is like a 3D map, helping design the 3D map, helping get all the customer data into the portal, all the different stores, hours, logos. There's a lot of data that needs to be ingested into our platform in order for them to have a good experience on the kiosk. And then we have like some customer success people.
I was thinking about your implementations actually, and about the work that would be necessary to configure all the different spaces and the turns and everything else. Do you guys ever get asked to do a lot of hand holding with like a big install or setup for a new customer?
So because our map system is proprietary, we built it ourselves simply because, like I talked about, there isn't really a solution for indoor wayfinding. You can use Google Maps for outdoor, but as soon as you get in, so we pretty quickly realized as we were getting more and more into these indoor spaces or places that don't necessarily have like a physical address, like a big mall area, we had to build basically our own wayfinding 3D mapping system. That is not currently at a place where like the customers can literally just log in and generate their own. There's a lot of hand holding there. So we normally end up getting like CAD files for their facility from them. And then we turn those into our 3-dimensional maps. As far as like routing goes, it's all automated. So when they generate the 3D map, we actually draw what we would call routing lines, and then the system's able to auto-calculate the best route there, just like Google Maps does. So if you take a wrong turn, if you're on your phone or whatever, if you get too far off the path, it recalculates and figures out how to get you there.
So you got some smarts in that system.
It took a while. That was one thing that none of us, when we first started at the company on the development side, we didn't really have experience with. So that was definitely something that we had to, built over time and got better and better over time to like just figuring out how to route people. And then you throw in once again, things Google Maps doesn't have to worry about, multiple floors. Okay.
Oh, true.
So if you're going from floor 1 to floor 3, escalators, but what happens if the person needs handicap accessibility?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can't take them to an escalator. You have to find the closest stairs that are handicap accessible. So an elevator. And then also sometimes, you have malls that are segmented. So, you have, or like, for example, a good example you might probably familiar with is like the Cincinnati airport. Okay. If you walk in, you have to start on street level, but then you have to go down where the trams are.
True, yeah.
So you're going down a level, but then you have to come back up to the street level again. So you're not just going one set of stairs.
Unless you start from the shuttle service that brings you from the parking lot, then you're half a level down.
Right.
And you have to go up a ramp area. Right?
So it's not always just one floor transition. Sometimes it's multiple floor transitions.
Something weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you get some weird stuff that, things like if you're just doing Google Maps, building 1 to building 2, it's not something you ever have to think about.
Yeah,
so you have to think on a 3-dimensional plane, not a 2-dimensional plane.
What are you most concerned about, or what is the leadership, the rest of the leadership team most concerned about with regard to RoveIQ and your success, your goals over the next couple of years? What's the big challenges you guys are facing?
So I think one of the areas that we've been emphasizing, because we realize is simply just trying to hit other markets and other verticals. There's only so many, big outdoor, indoor mall type facilities. I mean, normally you have a couple in big metropolitan areas. But eventually you're that market, you can only get so much market saturation in that. And then your company is going to kind of just level off. So that's where we've been trying to find other verticals, whether it be healthcare or universities or sports facilities, stuff like that, trying to make sure that we're not pigeonholed into a specific vertical, that we can continue to grow. And so sometimes that's, just contacting new people, but sometimes that's, hey, we need to completely modify our product and offer something different. Because if we, for example, we're getting into more and more back into municipalities where, as with a mall, they might have 200 stores they have to put into our web portal. And that's not an easy task necessarily. It might take a couple hours. And we do have import options where you can import Excel documents or different things. But now let's say, the city of Cincinnati wants to put these in downtown Cincinnati and they want to have every single restaurant, every single store in Cincinnati. Okay, well, now you're talking about tens of thousands of pieces of data. Nobody's going to manually put that in. So working with third-party APIs to try to pull in location data and possibly reviews and different things for restaurants so that people possibly even eventually maybe reserving a table, on the kiosk itself, different things like that. So we kind of have to constantly, as we're approaching new verticals, also figure out what do we have to change about our software to make it still work.
Have you given any thought to expanding internationally or outside the U.S.? Canada, even some easy targets or something?
Yeah, I believe we have. I would have to talk to the salespeople on that.
Yeah, how
from a
aggressive
technology
they're being about
perspective. I mean, obviously, anytime you start going outside the country, you have to worry about intellectual property issues and stuff like
there's
that.
all kinds of different problems.
And also privacy issues. Possibly, there's a few things on our kiosk that, if you want to take a selfie and have it emailed to you or texted to you, you have to put in your phone number, email. Different things that other countries might have different privacy laws. So I'm not real in tune and necessarily into the sales process, but I know they have contacted or been contacted by multiple people outside of our country. And I think we would be willing to do it. It's just a matter of none of the deals so far have really panned out well for us.
I've taken a couple of trips to Europe and a couple of the places I've been. That's a time when, as we're talking about wayfinding, that was a time when I was tied to my little map system or whatever we were using. to figure out our way around and to get to the, the transportation, that kind of thing. And obviously there are resources that exist for that, but not in every facility and not in every, system that you're plugged into. Sometimes there are just big gaps when you're traveling. And so you're having to pair together these different resources in order to navigate your way around. So it just made me wonder if, if it was, European expansion might be, I don't know. That's
yeah. And I mean, that's one area where like universities, for example, or even municipalities, we've talked to them, like, because if you could, what's one of the things that universities do a lot, like tour campuses or campus tours. If you could, instead of having a person like in the recruiting office or whatever, have to like walk people around, if you could have like an interactive experience where you go to kiosk 1 and it has kind of a something that you do and you can load it up on your phone. And then it says, okay, well, here's the directions to kiosk 2. We want you to go here next. Here's the buildings you can go to. You could almost make that like a non, like, you don't have to have any human interaction necessarily, where people could do kind of self tours. Same with like municipalities, you could have like different tours. Like let's say you want to do a beer crawl in Cincinnati, you don't want people driving.
It can be programmed.
Yeah. You could do, okay, we want you to go from this kiosk, then go into this bar, then go to this kiosk. There's a lot of different like things you could do where it's kind of, instead of them necessarily going to one kiosk, possibly multiple on like a journey.
A tourist chain event of sorts.
Exactly. It's kind of like a self-guided tour type thing. Where it's kind of in a combination of using your phone and like an interactive kiosk.
Yeah. As you guys are facing, this is kind of a question I always like to ask people toward the end of the conversation. So I'll wrap up with this, but as you were talking about the challenge of figuring out what new vertical or spaces to apply this wayfinding technology to, what you're doing to face that challenge. What are your plans and what's your approach toward figuring out what other spaces you can get into in order to keep yourself from kind of scaling out?
Sometimes there's a lot of inspiration purely from the customer side where, you have a customer call up a potential customer and they say, hey, we're interested in putting this in a university. And you're kind of like, okay, well, we're not really designed for that right now. Like, what would the steps be for us to get there? There's already kind of an established customer there because they're reaching out to us. And there obviously is a hole in the market because they're trying to find this. And, we're not even, SEO optimized for that, but somehow they're finding our name and they're asking us if we do it. So there's obviously some holes in the marketplace there that aren't being served. So a lot of times it's people who contact us and are saying, hey, can you work with this type of scenario? And we're like, well, we would like to. That's a good idea. And so, maybe the first time you hear that, you kind of ignore it. And, no, sorry, we don't do that. Second time you hear it, okay, well,
maybe we should.
Yeah, maybe we should.
Third time, you're like, let's do this shit.
Yeah. So it kind of builds. But then also sometimes we're actively, searching it out. We go to a lot of like big conferences for digital signs and things like that. And so, you kind of look around the market and see where different people are trying to utilize new technology. For example, like it's still our RoveIQ product, but a vertical we actually are just recently talking with a lot are zoos. Okay. Once again, like another great, or like amusement parks, another great option. Like, okay, you walk into Kings Island, for example, and I don't know how to get to this ride. And you can't necessarily pull up Google Maps and it's going to take you there. So, hey, let's walk up to it. And, they normally have pamphlet maps, but that's about it.
So poor because
exactly
the pamphlet never knows where you are. The board that does says you are here. It's not dynamic in any way. It can't give you any information.
So, being able to walk into a zoo and say, hey, like, okay, we want to find the tigers, and it takes you directly to that exhibit or something like that. So, I believe we're actually attending like a big zoo conference here soon to reach out to the different zoos around the country to try to get that vertical possibly started.
It's fortunate you've got so much interest from the market that new utilizations for your product are finding you. Right?
Yeah,
That's a
absolutely.
That's a great problem when you have to kind of sift through those and pick which ones to prioritize.
Yeah, it's always much easier in the sales process when you have inbound versus having to cold call every single customer, where you can have actually people reaching out to you and saying, hey, is this product going to work for us?
True.
So that's helpful.
True. Well, good luck to you in the build of the next phase of the product. The hospital stuff sounds really interesting. So
Yeah,
we're
getting real close on that. We should have that available here in probably the next month or two.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Well, Nate, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate you, man. All right.